Having yes, having spent myself on years of travel and content production, I entered a phase in life of not knowing where to go next, but really knowing where not to go. As much as once upon a time, fast travel used to be my gig, and I really enjoyed it. The truth is, once doesn't mean forever. It doesn't even mean now. In the recent past, when I was blissfully away on my digital vanvas, away from social media and all the hustle, the truth is that a part of me does not want to come back. But instead of shutting that part down, I want to bring it here and start this podcast really authentically by telling you how much, well, I don't want to be here. But the truth is that when life calls, we all gotta show up. And we gotta show up for who we are now. Isn't that? And that's exactly why this time I want to create something that is closer to who I am now, which is books. किताबें, क्योंकि कई बारी हम जो कहना चाहते हैं वो हमसे बेहतर बिना कुछ कहे किताबें कह जाती हैं. So a couple of years ago, when I was curating my poetry collection and at the same time navigating through a personally gardened hell. Yes, a personally gardened hell. It was a confusing place that got really dark in the moments, and I remember how this one question kept finding its way back to me. What are we even doing on this planet? It was a very prison-based, doing our karma, doing our time, sort of an outlook on life, and I had totally forgotten about the bliss, the bliss of being in the moment, the bliss of telling stories, recording it, sitting in the comfort of my own home, sharing my world with you guys. I totally forgotten the bliss of being in the right now, in the here and now. And I was lost in this overthinking maze, and it went on like that for quite some time. That's when one fine, sullen evening, one of my friends suggested this book to me. And if you've also been in a maze, have or had self-harming thoughts, then my friend, this book is for you. It's called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It's the story of Nora Seed that begins 27 hours before she decides to die. She's 32, deeply depressed, born, brought up, and continues to live in her wet little hometown called Bedford. So Nora, I love Nora's character. One of the things that will help us understand this character is when she was 16 in the school, the person most on her wavelength in the entire school was Mrs. Elm, the librarian. So she would often go out in her lunch breaks and sit in the library with Mrs. Elm. Then as she grew up with the choices she did or did not make, the writer, Matt Haig, calls her, and I'm going to quote this from the book, she was a black hole, a dying star, collapsing in on itself. Well, that's Matt Haig. But 27 hours before she decides to take her life, she's sitting in her room, scrolling through social media. It's a typical scene. You're going through social media, other people's life, to gain a contaminated dopamine that leaves you feeling like you are living in a waiting room, whereas other people outside, well, they seem to be having fun. Classic. And then there was an unexpected knock at the door. It's a guy from her town who had asked her out for coffee like years ago, but that's not why he's here right now. He's here to tell Nora that Nora's cat, Voltaire, is dead. And well, if you have suffered or grieved the loss of an animal companion, you know how devastating that can be. So the next morning, she rushes to work in the same green dress she's worn all week long to work, with a loose ponytail, no makeup, and There she stood explaining her boss why she's late. I mean, she had to bury her cat, for God's sake. That's when her boss reminds her of her prolonged, ignored mental health issues, while also reminding her of her past achievements. Now, what are the past achievements? So, through their conversation, we also find out that Nora was somebody looking at extraordinary career options not so long ago in life. Like at 14, she was already in the National Swimming Championship League, and she was the fastest swimmer. When she let that go because of too much pressure, her brother and she were also a part of a music band. She was the lead singer, and they had a big deal offered by Universal. But she panicked right before the contract was about to be signed. And she asked the label to go ahead with the band and leave her. But she was the lead singer, so that wasn't obviously going to happen. And eventually, Nora felt deeply regretful and disappointed in her own self for disappointing her bandmates and other people around her, her family, everybody else. Here's the thing, she wasn't sure if life in general is a crappy idea or if she wasn't good enough for life. There were enough around her to remind her of how she has missed her chances in life. Relatable much, huh? So eventually this led to her entire life being stacked into bundles and bundles of regrets. And the author describes her, I'm going to quote this from the book, as antimatter with added self-pity. Yes. Well, that's Matt Haig, yeah. And then the adventure paces up after Nora takes her life. I never thought I'll say that about anybody, but yes, the adventure does pace up after she decides to die. She finds herself in a library where a librarian looking exactly like Mrs. Elm, but not really the same in essence, shows up and informs her that she is at the Midnight Library. So here's what happened. Obviously, when Nora decided to take her life, she expected to be dead. But according to the book, you don't go to death. Death comes to you. And that is why Nora is in between life and death. And after the librarian informs her, Nora is like, I couldn't even do death right. So here it reads in the book, you don't go to death, death comes to you. According to the author, every life contains many millions of decisions, some big, some small. But every time one decision is taken over another, the outcome differs. An irreversible variation occurs, which in turn leads to further variation. These books are portals to all the lives you could be living. You have as many lives as possibilities. The tree that is our life develops branches, and think of all those branches departing from the trunk at different heights. And think of those branches branching off again, heading in often opposing directions. Think of those branches becoming other branches, and those becoming twigs in different places, having started from the same one. Our life is like that, but on a larger scale. New branches are formed every second of every day. And from our perspective, from everyone's perspective, it feels like a continuum. Every twig has traveled only one journey, but there are still other twigs, and there are other todays. Other lives that could have been different if you'd taken different directions earlier. This is a tree of life. Lots of religions and mythologies have talked about the tree of life. It's there in Buddhism, Christianity. Lots of writers have talked about the metaphor too. For Sylvia Plath, existence was a fig tree. Each possible life she could live, the happily married one, the successful poet one, was this sweet, juicy fig. But she couldn't get to taste the sweet, juicy figs, and so they just rotted right in front of her. It can drive you insane, thinking of all those lives we don't live. Well, that was Matt Haig. But here's the thing, Nora can choose from this vast library of lives. She can pick up any book, live that life, continue to live it if she likes it. And if she doesn't like it, she can pop right back into the Midnight Library and continue choosing other books and other lives. She does pick up quite a few interesting lives. Like, for instance, she decided to go to the band life, where she's living the rock star life and her band has become stadium level big. So we jump into the rock star Nora's life in the middle of a concert. She's on the stage and the audience is asking her to sing this particular song, but she doesn't know it. She doesn't know it because she's not the Nora to write that song. And yet, she sings something else and everybody still keeps asking her, oh, sing that song, sing that song. But she sings what she wants to sing and she feels wild and free again. So after this concert, there was this interview lined up. And during that interview, that she finds out that in this life, her brother is no more. His life was consumed by the tragedy of drugs and alcohol. And it just makes me wonder, as a reader, here there is one life in which she's still living in her, small, wet hometown, working in a music store, barely being able to afford rent and being kicked out of a job because of mental health issues. And here's this other Nora, this other twig of a life, other branch, in which she can thrive, she can do anything. She can just post a picture and millions of people are going to like it. She'll just say a word and people are there to listen to her. So while reading about all these choices Nora made or did not make, and she browsed through all these lives, I started wondering about what I present to you as the ultimate question. Which life would you choose if you were at the Midnight Library? I did ask myself this question again and again when I was thinking about what are we doing on this planet? Hello, right? Only to realize that no matter where we are, here is all we've got. Whether to make it a twig of a life or to make it into this overarching branch of tree bearing fruits to the tree of life that you are, that will always be a choice, isn't it? That's how I'm back on the podcast space here. And it feels good to be doing this in video this time. Initially, I thought we'll just do it on audio, but yeah, this feels good. Do let me know how you like it. Subscribe, comment, those things that people say on YouTube. Do that also. But on a more important note, do let me know. Which life would you choose if you were in the Midnight Library?